So Fluxfall Horizon is a tabletop role-playing game that I'm launching on Kickstarter here in November. It's a parallel Earths adventure game where you play as someone from one of 5 factions in the 24th century and jump or lance to alternate Earths. In this video, I just want to run through all the major design choices that I made for the game and my logic behind them. At the time of recording, the game has not yet been launched on Kickstarter, which means I don't know how many stretch goals will be met or how final playtesting and editing will affect my game. So some of my design decisions highlighted in this video might differ from the final game. Nevertheless, I expect most aspects of the game to be the same in the end. Fluxfall Horizon is a powered by the apocalypse game. From where I was standing at the start of this project, I had a few choices. I could make an original rules system, and that would mean picking the dice I'd want to use. Honestly, that would have been the most fun part, but after that, it would have been a tremendous amount of work. So on to my other options. Use an existing system that has one kind of open license or another. There are literally hundreds or maybe thousands of these, but in all honesty, only a couple dozen are well tested and well known enough that I'd be able to capitalize on those important aspects. I don't know if it shows in my channel, but I've always really liked more narrative styles of games, ones that avoid crunch and calculation. It's the whole reason I read and play RPGs, to tell a story. I don't want to reconcile travel distances and encumbrance thresholds and gear degradation, at least not at a prescribed rules as written mechanical level. And that's just a personal preference, obviously. So narrowing it down to story or narrative systems, I found myself looking at Powered by the Apocalypse, a design philosophy born out of Megway and Vincent Baker's Apocalypse World RPG, and Forged in the Dark, an offshoot design paradigm born of John Harper's Blades in the Dark RPG. I've reviewed a number of PbtA and Forged in the Dark games on the channel, and I've admired how much innovation game designers have put into expanding and changing the basis of these platforms. In the end, I wanted something easier and more accessible rather than packed with too much game structure, which means PbtA won out over Forged in the Dark, the latter of which makes for games with a heavily defined cycle of play and often a level of abstraction that moves you away from deep, sustained in-character roleplay. So what exactly is Powered by the Apocalypse anyway? One of the co-creators of Apocalypse World, Vincent Baker, has written a long series about the design philosophy that I'll link below. But if I had to unfairly summarize it in one quick blurb, I'd quote this paragraph from his blog. Apocalypse World's philosophy is, use the real things, the dice and stats and so on, to give momentum to the fictional things. The design is a roller coaster with ascents, moments of suspense, dizzying drops, sudden curves, moments of terror, moments of exhilaration. The game's real components do a lot of different things in a lot of different ways, but they're all in place to serve the excitement and momentum of the fictional action. He goes on to say that his game's rules collapse inward. You don't have to remember all the rules, and there is a hierarchy to those rules. Forget the outermost, least important layer of rules, and it's okay. Just play within the next sphere of rules, and in the end, all you really need is the conversation and the MC's or GM's basic driving goals of the game itself. Vincent has often said that a game having moves doesn't make it Powered by the Apocalypse, and this diagram right here sort of illustrates that. That being said, I like moves, so I incorporated them into my game. Moves, at least in Fluxfall Horizon, are triggered when a player character does a specific action. In a lot of cases, they are asked to roll dice in that moment to determine the nature of the consequence. One frequently triggered move in my game is Dive into Danger. Its trigger is when you confront or take on serious risk of mental or bodily harm head-on. Includes fighting, rescuing, or other general daring do. So first, a player character narrates the fact that they do something. Then the movie sort of pauses as this move is declared as being triggered. The player then rolls 2d6 and adds one core stat or another from their character sheet, and the sum of dice plus the stat produces one of 3 possible outcomes. It's extremely common to see this 3 possibility structure in moves. I'm not innovating anything here at all. One small choice I made here with this move, and with all of these traditional moves, is I made the 7 to 9 success with complication option just completely up to the GM. Another example is Sneakaroo. Here you see 6 or less as a failure, and the partial success option is the 7 to 9 range, and it has some suggestions for the GM to use. In every move where the dice are rolled, the player gets to narrate what a 10 plus success looks like. In terms of number of moves, I did my best to limit them. I settled on 8 in-game moves and 3 meta moves. The in-game moves are split between general action RPG moves and some more setting-specific and Fluxfall-specific moves that try to focus the gameplay and make it more distinctively Fluxfall Horizon. The biggest example of these theme-focused moves is Tinker with Flux Tech, which calls on a character stat that is specifically only used for this move. At any time, characters can go messing around with their Flux Tech equipment, which is the technology that enables them to travel to parallel worlds, and no matter what the dice gives them, there is a Fluxfall or jump. That Fluxfall means that they travel to another parallel world, where one or more things about the world around them are different from the last. This phenomenon of jumping Earths is sort of at the core of the game. The meta moves are shamelessly borrowed from Blades in the Dark. Flashback is where a player can suddenly conveniently remember something that they did in the past that helps them in the present moment. Like, oh yeah, I remembered that I waterproofed that computer device 2 days ago before we left. Of course, it's a dice roll here too, so it could have a bad effect. Then there's Prayer to the Void, which is essentially a devil's bargain. Players can buy a re-roll of the dice in exchange for a narrative failure other than the one that they are actively trying to avoid. Continuum coins are just completely ridiculous, out of character, out of game awards that players can give each other to use as a +1 on a future roll. I enjoyed this coin concept a lot with Index Card RPG's Hero Coin, although I'm not sure where it actually originates. There are so many ways to tackle character health in a game that it makes my head spin. Actually, I find that one of the fastest ways to gauge how crunchy an RPG is to go straight to how it handles character health. If you've got 3 different point pools plus a conditions mechanic for physical, mental, and spiritual health or whatever, then the game is probably a crunch fest. Anyway, I wanted to go the other way with that, but still have some way for characters to accumulate damage. Characters can pick up a so-called condition in the course of play, either by failing a move in a way that obviously delivers serious physical or mental harm, or as actually specified in a move, such as a bad Tinker with Flux Tech roll, or by not being close enough to the quantum hub when it makes Fluxfall. Conditions are really only for serious harm. They start suffering roll penalties after a couple conditions and eventually go unconscious, and that unconscious threshold can be increased by leveling up. This is one of those mechanics that's on the outer layer of Vincent's rules onion. If people forget to employ this stuff at the table, the game doesn't fall apart. The story can go on and people can still have fun without it. I know it's pretty controversial to say this, but I don't need 10 character stats. I don't even need 6. I tried to make this game have just 4, power, movement, mental, and tech, but I made a 5th one for Flux Tech because I needed a separate track specifically for the Flux Tech move. But I'm happy with 5. I think one of the biggest choices I made in this department was to stick with 2d6 for the dice, aka I played it safe because that's what a vast majority of PbtA games use. There's been a lot of analysis and endless discussion on the probability spread of 2d6, usually prompted by people asking why not use a single d12 die. But for a while, I was really considering using a single d20 die. After doing some research and finding some other people who have already considered it, I found the probability breakdown to look like this, essentially with results that look like this. So with a d20, you get fewer failures, more partial successes, and slightly fewer complete successes, at least with this range translation. This is honestly not a controversial result in my opinion, and I really thought it would have been cool to just throw a d20 around all session. But in the end, I wanted PbtA veterans to be able to pick this game up and start playing without having to worry about their familiar probabilities being offended. One later addition I made to the game was a second experience track for players to feed that could lead to really wacky powers. The first experience track just ticks up anytime a player rolls a failure, and they can unlock specials for their type or a higher unconscious threshold. But points on this second track are earned by role-playing a certain thing. It's totally up to the player, but if they want to lean into their type and play it up to hit the trigger, they can start unlocking quantum powers. This is a self-destructive path, of course. They can only get up to 3 quantum powers, as well as a couple of stat increases before their character achieves what I call complete disentanglement. Actually, if the player reaches the end of their experience track, it also leads to the end of their character, but on a more positive note, through fulfilling whatever their core goal was. The point of these 2 tracks was ultimately to make the characters have a relatively short story span. They're meant to burn fast and bright in a one-shot or short campaign. That's probably enough for now. If you're interested in seeing how this game shakes out on Kickstarter or in getting your hands on the game yourself, follow the links below and join up. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on game design in the comments below. All right, I'm out. Thanks for watching.